The copper coins clicked against the wooden sill for the third time that hour, a rhythmic, desperate sound that Rose hoped might somehow conjure more out of the air. 6 pennies, the sum total of her existence, sat arranged in a row like a silent plea to a god she wasn't sure was listening. Outside, through the distorted glass of her small window, the brutal January wind whipped down Main Street. A solitary rider, looking more like a ghost than a man, slumped onto the frost-covered bench in front of the local eatery. His mount stood beside him with a hanging head, its flanks heaving and its breath blooming in white, ragged plumes. The stranger's beard was a mask of ice, and his hat lay abandoned in the slush at his feet, forgotten in his exhaustion. Rose pulled her threadbare shawl over her shoulders, the fabric offering little more than the illusion of warmth, and began her descent to the street. The freezing air was like a physical blow when she stepped outside, but Rose was accustomed to the cold, both the atmospheric kind and the social chill that followed her every step in Redemption Flats. She felt the eyes from behind the lace curtains of the upper-floor rooms. They were always watching, always cataloguing her movements with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. Reaching the diner, she found the door bolted against the winter. She rapped on the glass until the proprietor, old Miller, cracked the door open, his clothes dusted with the white powder of his morning baking. "Give that man a hot meal and put it on my account," Rose commanded, gesturing toward the nearly unconscious figure on the bench. Miller's response was a dry, mocking cackle that lacked any real humor. "Account? Girl, you don't have enough standing in this town to own the dirt on your boots. It's hard currency or nothing, especially for someone of your reputation." Without a word of protest, Rose reached out and placed her 6 copper coins upon the threshold. It was everything she had. Miller looked down at the meager payment, then up at her face, his expression unreadable. He scooped the coins into his palm and retreated into the warmth of the kitchen. Rose turned and approached the bench. He tried to raise a hand to dismiss her, to tell her he didn't want a handout, but his strength failed him. "This isn't a gift of pity," Rose said, her voice steady despite the shivering of her limbs. "It's simply that you look like you've reached the end of your rope faster than I have." He tried to speak, perhaps to ask her name or thank her, but she had already turned her back. She walked toward the shadows of McGrath's saloon, where her work awaited and the sunlight never quite reached. Caleb Thornton watched her receding figure, the frost on his skin beginning to melt. The moisture on his cheeks, however, wasn't just from the thawing ice. He realized in that moment that a woman who lived in the margins of society had just sacrificed her last bit of security for a stranger. He knew who he was, but she didn't have the slightest clue, and that realization shifted the very axis of his world. By the time the sun reached its zenith, the story of Rose's extravagance had permeated every corner of the town. She felt the weight of it the moment she stepped into Pritchard's general store. The low hum of conversation died instantly, replaced by a heavy, judgmental silence. Mrs. Pritchard stood behind the counter, her posture as rigid as a tombstone and her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I understand you saw fit to play the benefactor to a common vagrant this morning, Mrs. Pritchard projected, her voice carrying easily to the women browsing the fabric bolts. "It seems girls of a certain profession have a vacuum where their common sense should be. I suppose you expected him to settle the debt in some other fashion tonight?" A chorus of stifled giggles erupted from the aisles. Rose focused her gaze on the stacks of flour sacks, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. "2 pounds of flour, please," she said quietly. "Cash at the time of purchase," Mr. Pritchard barked from the back office doorway. "We don't extend credit to your sort." Rose's fingers tightened around the fabric of her empty purse. She gave a single, stiff nod and exited the store, the mocking laughter of the respectable women ringing in her ears like a funeral bell. Meanwhile, across the dusty expanse of town at the Territorial Land Office, a far different scene was playing out. "Mr. Thornton." The clerk scrambled to his feet, his chair screeching against the floorboards in his haste. "We didn't anticipate your return from the Denver negotiations so soon, sir." Caleb removed his hat, now cleaned and brushed, revealing the sharp, intelligent face of a man used to command. On the desk before him lay a mountain of legal documents, deeds to thousands of acres, water rights that controlled the lifeblood of the valley, and titles to several major buildings, including the very saloon where Rose worked. "The young woman at McGrath's," Caleb said, his voice low and dangerous. "Tell me about her." The clerk, sensing a chance to curry favor with the most powerful man in the territory, leaned in with a conspiratorial grin. "Ah, Rose. One of those orphan train leftovers. Came through years ago. A family took her in, but there was a messy business with the son. She claimed he forced himself, they claimed she tempted him. You know how those things go. The preacher's wife tried to help, but some people are just born for the gutter." Caleb's jaw set into a hard line. "I don't believe I follow your meaning." The clerk's smile faltered, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. "Just that, well, she works at the saloon, sir. She serves the whiskey." "And the building itself," Caleb interrupted. "I hold the deed to McGrath's, do I not?" "Yes, sir. You own nearly half the commercial district. Then her employment is a matter of my personal concern. Good day." Caleb stepped out into the biting afternoon air, a heavy sense of debt weighing on him more than his heavy sheepskin coat. This woman had saved him when he was at his lowest, and in return, the town he had helped build treated her with less respect than a stray dog. He didn't ride out of Redemption Flats that day. Instead, he secured a room at the local boarding house and began to observe, his mind working through a strategy. He needed to find a way to repay a debt to a woman who had no idea he owed her anything at all. That evening, Rose stood over a basin of freezing water, scrubbing her hands until the skin was raw and red. She was trying to wash away the feeling of the town stares, but the stain of their judgment was deeper than any physical grime. As she dried her hands, a white envelope slid silently under her door. She didn't need to open it to know what it contained. Eviction notices had a specific, cold weight to them. McGrath's Saloon has been sold. New management effective March 1st, current staff must vacate by February 15th. No letters of recommendation will be issued. She had exactly 14 days. 14 days to find a way to survive in a community that had already condemned her. She opened her small tin lockbox with trembling hands. $23. The stagecoach to California was $40. It wasn't enough. She lay back on her narrow mattress and allowed herself a rare moment of remembrance, the faces on the Orphan train when she was 8, her mother's silhouette fading on a rainy platform, and the salvation of the farm family that turned out to be a life of indentured servitude. She remembered the son's hands, the mother's screaming accusations, and the way the world always chose the side of the person with property. Rose blew out her lamp and lay in the dark, calculating her survival with the cold precision of an accountant. She thought of the 6 coins. They might have been the difference between a ticket out of this town and another season of misery, but she knew in her heart she would give them away again. Kindness was the only thing she truly owned, and she refused to let the town take that from her, too. Outside in the swirling snow, Caleb Thornton stood in the shadows, looking up at her dark window. He had made his choice. Tomorrow he would offer her a way out. He prayed she would have the courage to accept it, and that he would have the strength to prove that not every man of means was a predator. The knock on Rose's door at sunrise was unexpected. When she opened it, she found the cowboy from the bench, but he had undergone a transformation. He was clean-shaven, his hair trimmed, and his clothes spoke of wealth and status. His eyes, however, were the same. Dark, weary, and filled with a strange sort of penance. "You didn't need that meal," Rose said, her heart sinking. "No, ma'am, I didn't," he admitted, removing his hat. "My name is Caleb Thornton. I own the ranch that bears my name, along with a good portion of this valley. I've come to offer you a position." Rose felt a flush of heat rise to her face. Everyone knew the Thornton name. He was the shadow king of the territory, and she had treated him like a charity case. "I don't accept pity," she snapped, beginning to close the door. His boot caught the edge of the frame, firm but gentle. "It isn't pity. I'm in desperate need of a manager for my estate, someone to oversee the accounts, manage the household staff, and handle the supply chains. My home has fallen into disarray since my wife passed. The position pays $30 a month, with full room and board." $30. It was a fortune. "Why me?" Rose asked, her voice tight. "The town is full of respectable women who would kill for such a post." Caleb met her gaze squarely. "Because you were willing to sacrifice everything for a stranger when you thought no one was watching. That is the only character reference I require." Rose searched his face for the hidden catch, the unspoken price that men usually extracted from women like her. "A 1-month trial," she stated firmly. "I stay in the workers' quarters, not the main house. I take my meals alone. This is a business arrangement, Mr. Thornton. Nothing more." "Agreed," he said, extending his hand. She shook it briefly, then pulled away. "I'll begin on Monday." He left a contract on her table, a document with clear terms and her name written with respect. Rose read it over and over, looking for the trap, but found only fairness. The first 3 weeks at the Thornton Ranch felt like a fever dream. The property was magnificent, 300 acres of prime grassland and a sturdy manor of stone and timber. Rose attacked the work with a vengeance. She organized a library that had gathered dust for years, corrected accounting errors that had cost the ranch hundreds, and renegotiated contracts with suppliers who had been overcharging the estate. Caleb was often away on business, but when he was home, he was a silent, respectful presence. Occasionally, she would catch him watching her. Not with the predatory hunger she was used to, but with a quiet, burgeoning hope. One evening, he found her by the hearth in the main house, reading a worn copy of Jane Eyre. "You enjoy the Brontes?" he asked. Rose jumped, clutching the book. "I'll return it to the shelf immediately." "Keep it," he insisted. "My wife loved those books. She would have wanted them to be read." He paused at the door. "You've done wonders here, Rose. The ranch hasn't been this well run in a decade." "Thank you, Mr. Thornton." "Caleb," he corrected softly. "When we are alone, please call me Caleb." "That wouldn't be appropriate for my station." "Appropriate is a word people use to keep their neighbors small," he said with a sad smile before retreating into the hall. The following day, while filing old papers, Rose discovered a stack of receipts. They were anonymous payments for the property taxes of several widows in town, all signed with the initial CT. "Why did you hide your charity?" she asked him that night. "For the same reason you didn't announce your poverty at the diner," he replied. "True kindness doesn't require an audience." They stood in the soft amber glow of the lamps, the air between them thick with things unsaid. For the first time, Rose allowed herself to imagine a life where she didn't have to keep her guard up. But that peace was short-lived. The Redemption Flats Town Council met on the first Tuesday of every month. Caleb attended out of obligation, his mind usually on cattle prices. But then the mayor stood up, his wife smiling like a vulture in the front row. "We propose a new ordinance," the mayor announced. "To protect the moral fabric of our town, no individual previously employed in an establishment of ill repute shall be permitted to own property, teach, or hold a place in our congregation." They were targeting Rose. The room went silent, all eyes turning toward Caleb. His vote carried the most weight. He thought of his pending water legislation, he thought of the political capital he needed to pass it, and he thought of the town's approval. He stayed silent. The ordinance passed. When Rose went into town the next day, Mrs. Pritchard was waiting for her with a jagged, cruel smile. "Did you hear the news, Rose?" Your benefactor sat right there and didn't utter a single word of protest while we cleared the moral rot from our streets. It seems his gratitude has its limits. The world tilted on its axis. Rose finished her errands in a daze, the betrayal cutting deeper than any insult. He had watched her be slandered and said nothing. She returned to the ranch, packed her single bag, and left a note on the kitchen table. 1 month is up. The books are balanced. I won't stay where I am not defended. When Caleb found the note, it felt like a physical blow. He rode to the cemetery and sat by his wife's grave in the freezing dark. I had one chance to be the man you thought I was, he whispered to the headstone. And I chose my own comfort over her dignity. I'm no better than the rest of them. He stayed there until the shame became a fire in his belly. He knew what he had to do. Sunday morning broke with a deceptive brightness. The church bells rang out, and Rose stood at the back of the sanctuary, her bag at her feet. She wasn't leaving yet. She wanted them to see her. She wanted them to look at the decay they were so afraid of. As the preacher began a sermon on the necessity of purging the unrighteous, the heavy oak doors creaked open. Caleb Thornton walked down the center aisle, but he didn't stop at his usual pew. He walked straight to the pulpit, his eyes locked on Rose at the back of the room. The preacher stepped aside, intimidated by the sheer gravity of the man. Caleb turned to the congregation. This past month, I have watched a woman of no means do more for the soul of this town than all of you combined, Caleb's voice boomed, echoing off the rafters. She gave her last cent to a man she thought was dying. She saved my ranch thousands through her intellect and honesty. And while she was doing the work of a saint, I sat in this very room and allowed you to call her a plague. I was a coward. He looked directly at the mayor. I am withdrawing my support for the water project. In fact, I am liquidating my holdings in this town. If Rose is not welcome here, then neither is my money, my land, or my name. The silence in the church was absolute. Caleb stepped down from the pulpit and walked the length of the aisle. He stopped in front of Rose and held out his hand, not as a master to a servant, but as an equal. I don't deserve another chance, he said, his voice breaking. But I would like to spend the rest of my life trying to earn one. Will you come home? Rose looked at the stunned, pale faces of the townspeople, then back at the man who had finally found his voice. She didn't take his hand immediately. Instead, she picked up her bag and walked out the door under her own power. Caleb followed her into the sunlight. As they walked toward the ranch, the snow began to melt in earnest, the first hint of spring whispering through the valley. Rose looked at the coins she still kept in her pocket, the change from her final month's wages, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the need to count them. She knew exactly what she was worth.